They were not surrounded by accident. They were not forgotten by mistake. They were sent to that hill to hold it, long enough for someone else to escape. No reinforcements were planned. No rescue was expected. No one was coming. Their orders were simple: stay, delay the enemy, and die quietly if necessary. Most Americans would never hear their names, and for decades, no one did. This is the story of the men who were never supposed to survive. October 1944, Eastern France. The Vosges Mountains were quiet that morning. Too quiet. The forest was thick with pine trees, their branches woven together so tightly that sunlight barely touched the ground. The air smelled of wet needles and cold earth. Fog drifted low between the trunks, turning distance into uncertainty. Captain Robert Ellis studied the map one last time. The red pencil line stopped at a narrow ridge. "That's it," the colonel had said the night before. "You take the hill. Hold it." No mention of relief, no timeline, no contingency. Ellis knew what it meant. The men with him were not elite commandos. They were regular infantry, tired, underfed, and weeks past exhaustion. Some had replacements boots still too stiff to break in. Others carried letters they hadn't answered in months. They moved uphill in silence. Every step sank into mud. Rifles knocked softly against gear. No one joked. No one smoked. Veterans could feel it. When an order is too simple, it usually hides the truth. At the top of the ridge, Ellis raised his hand. They stopped. The ground dropped sharply on the far side. A narrow road ran through the trees below, the only pass wide enough for German armor to move through the region. That road was the reason they were here, and the reason they were expendable. Ellis turned to his platoon leaders. "We dig in," he said, "deep." Someone asked, "When do we get relieved, sir?" Ellis paused. "Soon," he lied. They began to dig. By nightfall, the temperature dropped sharply. The fog thickened, swallowing sound. The forest no longer felt empty. It felt occupied, as if unseen eyes were watching from behind every tree. The men finished their foxholes just as darkness settled in. They hadn't dug far before hitting rock. Most holes were shallow, too shallow. Captain Ellis walked the line, checking positions. He crouched beside a young private whose hands were shaking as he loaded his rifle. "Cold?" Ellis asked. The boy nodded. Ellis didn't correct him. At 21:40, the first mortar round landed. It did not explode near the perimeter. It landed behind them. The ground trembled. Dirt and needles rained down into the foxholes. Another round followed, then another. The Germans were not probing. They were ranging. Within minutes, machine guns opened up from the tree line below. Long, controlled bursts, not wild fire, professional fire. The ridge erupted in noise. Men pressed themselves into the earth as bullets snapped overhead. Tree trunks splintered, branches crashed down. Someone screamed for a medic. Ellis crawled forward, shouting orders that were swallowed by the forest. The radio crackled uselessly, static, no response. At 22:15, the firing stopped. Just like that. The silence afterward was worse. No one moved. No one spoke. They waited. At dawn, they counted the cost. 7 dead, 15 wounded, 1 machine gun destroyed. No German bodies found. They hadn't attacked the hill. They had tested it. Sergeant Miller, a man who'd survived North Africa and Sicily, leaned toward Ellis. "They know we're here, and they know we're alone." Ellis nodded. He already knew. At 10 o'clock that morning, the radio finally came alive.
Static, then a voice. "Hold your position," headquarters said. "Enemy activity reported. Reinforcements delayed." Delayed. Ellis stared at the handset. "How long?" he asked. A pause. "Unknown." The word hung heavier than any shell. The men listened as the message was passed down the line. No one panicked. That came later. They ate cold rations in silence, shared cigarettes, wrote letters they couldn't send. By afternoon, German artillery began again, this time closer. Shells exploded in the treetops. Wooden shards rained down like knives. A helmet could stop steel. It could not stop a spear of pine. That night they learned to fear the trees. And somewhere far behind the lines, staff officers moved colored pins on a map, already calculating how long these men could delay the enemy, not how to save them.
The third day began without shelling. That worried them. War had taught these men that silence was never mercy. Captain Ellis gathered his senior NCOs behind a fallen pine tree. The bark was shredded from earlier fire. Sap leaked down the trunk like dried blood. "We can't hold here much longer," Sergeant Miller said. "Ammo's low. Half the men haven't slept." Ellis nodded. "The wounded?" another asked. "3 need evacuation," Miller said. 2 can't walk." The radio operator tapped the handset, adjusted the antenna, tried a different frequency. Static. Then, faintly, a voice. Ellis grabbed the receiver. "This is Able Company, 2nd Battalion. Request immediate medvac. We have wounded who won't last another night." A pause. Then the reply. "Negative. Air corridor unsafe. Ground approach impossible." Ellis closed his eyes. "When can you reach us?" he asked. Another pause. Then the truth, wrapped in calm professionalism. "Captain, you were deployed to delay enemy movement through that sector. Your position is critical." Ellis said nothing. He didn't need the rest of the sentence. He handed the radio to Sergeant Miller. Miller listened, then lowered it slowly. "They're not coming," he said. No anger, no shock, just certainty. The news spread quietly. No announcement, no speech. Men simply saw it in the officers' faces. Some reacted with disbelief, others with relief, a few with laughter, the dry kind that comes when fear has nowhere left to go. Private Harris sat in his hole, staring at a photograph of his wife. He folded it carefully and placed it inside his helmet liner. "If we're not getting out," he said to no one in particular, "then let's make it count." That afternoon, the Germans attacked again. This time they came in force. Infantry moved uphill behind rolling artillery. Machine guns pinned the ridge, while mortars walked closer with every round. The Americans fired carefully. No waste, no panic. Each burst was deliberate, each target chosen. They weren't trying to win, they were trying to last. A German assault group reached the wire just before dusk. Hand grenades exploded among the trees. Smoke filled the foxholes. Sergeant Miller stood to throw a grenade back downhill. A burst caught him in the chest. He fell without a sound. Ellis dragged him into cover. Miller's breathing was shallow. Blood soaked through his jacket. Ellis leaned close. "We're holding," Ellis said. "Just like you said." Miller smiled faintly. "Good. That's enough." He was dead before night fell. After dark, the firing slowed. The Germans had learned what this hill would cost them, and so had the Americans. Ellis walked the line one last time that night. Men met his eyes and nodded. No speeches were needed. They had crossed a line. Fear was still there, but it no longer ruled them. Now there was only purpose. The final attack came before dawn. No artillery preparation, no warning, just movement in the fog. The Germans had learned the hill. They came in close, using the trees for cover, moving uphill in short bursts. Rifles cracked, grenades thudded into the earth. Captain Ellis fired until his rifle clicked empty. He switched to his pistol. Men fought from holes filled with water and mud. Hands bled from reloading. Throats burned from shouting warnings that barely carried 10 feet in the fog. A flamethrower appeared at the edge of the ridge. Its operator moved carefully, sweeping the ground ahead of him. Ellis saw it and knew what it meant. If that weapon reached the center of the position, the hill would fall in minutes. He grabbed 3 men and moved toward it. They didn't run. They advanced low, using shell craters and fallen logs. A grenade went wide. Another detonated too short. The flamethrower roared. Fire spilled across the forest floor, igniting needles and leaves. Ellis fired his last rounds. The operator fell. The fuel tank ignited. The explosion lit the fog like daylight. When it was over, the ridge was silent. The Germans pulled back, not because they were beaten, because they were delayed. By mid-morning, artillery began firing from miles behind the lines. The sound was unmistakable. Heavy guns. The Germans had lost their window. The road below the ridge was no longer theirs. Captain Ellis slumped against a tree, exhausted. Of the men who had climbed the hill with him, fewer than half could still stand. They had held for 4 days, exactly as planned. Late that afternoon, a jeep reached the base of the ridge. A staff officer climbed out. He looked at the wounded being carried down. "How long did you hold?" he asked. Ellis stared at him. "Long enough," he said.
They were relieved the next morning. Not by infantry, by silence. The enemy was gone. The road below the ridge was filled with American armor and trucks moving east. The delay had worked. The line had held. Medics came first. They moved carefully among the foxholes, stepping around spent casings and broken branches. Some men were still sitting where they had fought, staring into nothing. Captain Ellis was ordered to report to battalion headquarters. The colonel shook his hand. "Good work," he said. "You did what was needed." Ellis nodded. He did not speak about Sergeant Miller, or the others. Their names were written down. Their unit received a citation. A few medals were pinned on dress uniforms months later. Then the war moved on. After the war, Ellis returned home. He took a job, raised a family, attended reunions where men spoke carefully, avoiding certain details. When someone asked about the hill, he always answered the same way. "We held it." Nothing more. No monument was built on that ridge. No sign marks the foxholes. The trees grew back. But the delay they bought changed the campaign, and the men who climbed that hill changed with it. They were never supposed to survive. That was never the point. Their job was to hold long enough for others to live. And they did.